All right, last but not least, we have these cables that I've modeled for the back of my monitors here, and I have little clips on them as well, just kind of holding them in place. So let's take a look at the unwrap for these guys. Now, it's going to look really messy when I open these guys up, but it's actually a fairly decent unwrap in some ways. Because I use splines to model these guys here, so let's just put on the checker pattern here. Now, we're getting a lot of stretching here, but let's not worry about that for now. Now, because I use splines to make these guys, let's just kind of quickly go over that again. So, use splines, I made them. When you make something out of splines, under the modifier panel here, under rendering, there's a little thing here called generate mapping coordinates, and let's I'm just going to duplicate these guys and do both. So on this set here, I've generated mapping coordinates. So if I add an unwrap modifier and take a look at it, it's unwrapped to this nice grid here. And if I take a look at the other one where I didn't put that on, it does this for me. Now, this is the worst thing ever. Trying to unwrap this thing would be a nightmare. It would just be, it's awful. It's not good times. Max has some better utilities to kind of deal with this, and we'll go over those in a little bit. But this is not the starting point you want to be at. At this point, I would rather remodel this thing because it's just a simple spline than ever deal with that unwrap. So let's just go back to my cables here, and we'll talk about some of this. All right, so let's open this up again. Let's take a look at all these crazy ass lines that it's made. So they're all stretched to hell, and the reason for that is when it unwraps a spline for you, well, for whatever the hell reason, it fits the entire friggin' square. And we'll take whatever unwrap it has, right, and just smush it in there. It's really stupid. But whatever, it's still better than we were at before. So let's just select all these guys here. And what we can do is we can use the scale tool, and you'll see here as we're scaling, these guys are becoming a little bit more proportionate. Now what's going to happen is I'm just going to scale this up so I could actually see my grid a little bit better. I'll scale all of them up. And I'm going to just keep squishing it on the one axis here until these guys are nice and square. I could swap over to my other grid if that's easier, or the checker one, whichever one is easier. If you want to scale these up to get a better sense of that, then it's up to you. All right, so kind of eyeball it a little bit, but there we go. We have a pretty damn good unwrap. So I'm going to quickly just pack these guys in here, and let's take a look what we have. So we have these nice little things, and it's scaled them proportionately, right? Because these little guys here are there too. Now, the one crappy thing that, about the spline unwrapping that it does, aside from this craziness, is let's take a look at this right here. This is the band that I have right here. Now, if you look here, should be something you notice that's quite different between the two of these guys. It kept all the widths of these edges equal. So all four of these guys are equally wide in the unwrap. But in the mesh, these guys are way wider. So even though it did a nice flat unwrap for me, it actually didn't keep my proportions really well, which really sucks. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to adjust them myself. So this first one here is this top guy. So what I'm going to do is go to my edge select and just double click that one edge. And I'm going to move this out. I might scale this guy up just for unwrapping purposes. Whoop. Again, nothing wrong with working big if you need to. All right, so again, I'm going to double click on the edge there just to select that one edge, and I'm going to move this out until they're perfect squares. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these verts over here, and I might do the same thing over here just to make sure that the edge is also the same thing. And I'm going to hit my grow button to just, oh, that did not work. I can't do that, sorry. I'll do this. I use Control and double clicking these buttons to allow me to select multiple edges. And I'm going to move this guy out here too. This is the bottom of this little band here. And I'm just going to try and get my proportions as correct as they can get. All right, so I'm going to do that for all of these guys here, and I'm going to make sure that the little edges that I've modeled out, because I've modeled out little lips here, I'm going to unwrap those guys too, make sure they're all nice and good. So I'm going to go through, do all that, I'm going to pack them eventually once they're all done. Now, you might notice eventually that once I have all of my my monitors and all that stuff set up, and I've unwrapped all these things, you know, maybe I need a lot of resolution from these guys. Maybe I need them to be really, really tall, right? Like this is the resolution I want, but they're not going to fit in the square. So if I was going to just unwrap these wires on their own and I pack them, well, this is as good as it's going to get, really, right, at the resolution they're at, because I can't scale them anymore. And that sucks, right? Like that's not the resolution I would want for these guys, and they're going to waste a lot of texture space because of because of their shape. So what I'm going to do as an artist, I'm going to have to pick seams along these guys, along the actual tubes. I'm going to have to find a way to break these guys up. Now, I've modeled these little strips over here to kind of, you know, make it feel like they're all tied together and they're all organized and shit. But really what I can do is I can use this to give myself some edges to break this mesh up. So I'm going to go to my editable poly. I'm going to hit this edge here. I'm going to hit ring. I'm going to hit connect. I'm going to switch my constraints to edge. I'm going to put preserve UVs on. That way I'm not messing up my unwraps, hopefully. And I'm going to just align these guys underneath these bands. Now, hopefully some of these already have them. So this little guy already has one right underneath. This guy does not. He kind of does. Sometimes I could just move some of the edges that I already have. You know, not everything might need a brand new edge. Well, that's kind of fuckly there. Should have addressed that, but that's okay. I don't know why it's not letting me select this guy. Oh, is he not part of my... There we go. Sometimes Max is weird about selections. There we go. Ring, connect. All right. All right, how about this guy? Is he good? He's all good. So now I've aligned all these guys under the second band here. And I'm going to open up my UV editor again. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go on these dudes, and just one by one, I'm going to select their faces here. I'm going to probably do a few at a time. I'm going to select those faces. I'm just going to use my plus sign just to start clicking through these guys. Now, they're probably not all equal edges to get to there, but that's okay. All right, so this guy is ready. And I'm going to just select. Actually, you know, I could probably just do this. Oh, I forgot to cut that one guy up. And I'm going to go in here. I'm just going to deselect the rings here. Now you see here I have all of these guys up to their sections there, up to the new cuts that I gave them. I'm going to use my tools detach edge verts. Oops. Do that for these guys. I still have to do that for this one back here. Oh, actually, which one is? I'm going to deselect that guy because he still needs a new cut. So I'm going to undo this. Oops. Can't do elements, of course. There we go. Okay, so I have to detach those guys. All right, and now I'm going to do this guy here. So I'm going to, I forgot to give one to him here. So I'm going to hit ring, oops. Ring, connect, edge, preserve UVs. Move that over here, go back to my unwrap. All right, that's this one right here. All right, and deselect that. Now I'm starting to get smaller chunks of these guys, right? So I'm going to do the same thing, or I would do the same thing to this end here. I would select all these guys up until they're, up until, you know, the seam there. Let's say this was the actual seam, right? I'm not going to bother actually doing that right now. And I would go into here and detach those guys. Whoa, that did a crazy ass job. Oh, I have there's a little button here under the menu called Ignore Back Faces. What it will do is when I click and marquee select like I did, it did actually not select any of the stuff that was facing away from the camera, which is quite dangerous. Quite useful if you need it, but quite dangerous if you forget it's there. So let's say that's that, and deselect. And now when I pack these guys, because they're all small chunks, we can fill up a lot more of this square and get a lot more resolution out of this thing. When you are packing really simple objects, you can take the padding down here as well. You can put it to 0.1. This is how much space is left in between these guys. And now I have a lot more space, you know, and manually I could even go through and even help this out even more, you know. Let's throw you in here. This guy, say he's in here. Maybe I'll squish a little. Throw these dudes over here. Let's lower this down a little bit. And now we can scale this up. And look at that, we got a whole square filled up, right? Just by adding some cuts and splitting this stuff up. And the nice thing is people will never notice because your seams are underneath these little cuts. So, you know, think smart when you're modeling. Make yourself geometry sections like that to make seams, to cut stuff up, because this is going to bake out like a badass. It's going to look awesome, you know. It's the last thing you want is seams across visible planes and or really bad resolution because you didn't feel like putting in some extra work and cutting stuff up. So consider that when you're doing things like wires and cables, things that are really long, and you know, find ways to break them up if you need them. If these guys were super tiny, I mean, obviously it wouldn't matter, but you know, if you run into that situation, that's a good fix for you. So let's take a look at this last spline that I had made before, if you guys remember, just at the start of the video. I made the spline and, well, actually let's not use this one because he sucks, but let's make a new spline here. I'm going to make a spline. I'm modeling, having a great time. I've added some cables and wires and things like that. And then a few days later, I've collapsed this down to an edible poly. You know, let's give this a little bit more thickness. A little less edges. All right, so I've modeled this thing, I've collapsed it to an edible poly, and I forgot to put on generate mapping coordinates. But I'm so far out. Let's say this was a fairly complicated mesh, or I did other stuff to the high poly, and this is my low poly, but the high poly is a crazy ornate. I've done runes and shit on the side of it, and I do not want to remodel this thing or reposition it. I am just going to suck it up and unwrap this thing. Well, let's take a look at how we can do that. So by default, this thing's going to suck. It's going to be a giant piece of garbage. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the caps of this thing. So cap number 1 and cap number 2. Cap number 2 is always in 3 pieces for some freaking reason. I'm going to flat map them and just get them the hell out of the way. Number 2 is I'm going to add a seam onto this thing because it does not have one. When you are doing seams on things like cylinder, like wires and things like that, consider where your seam goes. If my players are going to be viewing this thing from the side, I'm going to put my seam on the other side. If they're going to be viewing it from the bottom, I'm going to put it on the inside. Just consider that wisely. So I'm going to do my point-to-point seam here. So I'm going to select one end of this tube, and the other end, you'll see a little yellow line gets created there to kind of show you where that seam is going to be. So I've done a seam there, and I'm going to do a quick belt. Now the quick pelt actually did a pretty damn good job for me. I'm pretty surprised, mainly because this thing is just like a slight bend, so it's not too bad. Um, so that is definitely an option you have to go through if you forgot to do that. Max does have another feature in here, and that's called, it's right under Reshape Elements. There's a thing called here Straighten Selection, and what it'll do is it'll take whatever you have and sometimes really mess it up like this. uh, let's take a look at what it did. Did it do a good job? Let's see here. Let's select faces. It did not do a very good job. It stretched the shit out of my mesh for some reason. Sometimes it'll do a good job and actually try and straighten out all these edges and not ruin your mesh too much. Um, so use that as you can, but definitely it has some problems. And if you really feel like it, and you want to be perfect, you can always go through and flatten all these guys yourself. Again, if you have a shortcut for these things, you can do it in no time. Go through and do every edge, just double clicking to do a loop. And flattening that out, and I could do it the other way too, and then I'll have a perfect unwrap. So it's not the end of the world if you forget to unwrap your cylinders or splines before you convert them to a notable poly. A bit more of a pain in the butt. Obviously, the more complicated your thing is, the harder it'll be, but definitely there is a way to do that. So um, that's kind of the end of the more kind of advanced unwrapping stuff. Really, none of it is overly crazy. Unwrapping is just time consuming and kind of methodical. You just got to find what works for you and just rinse and repeat until you get what you're looking for. So hopefully that helps you guys. Let me know if there's any specific things you would like me to cover, and I shall do that. So for now, thank you.